Over the years, we've had many iterations of personal skills, but intelligence systems really hit their stride when they got to Fates, where most characters got really cool, unique personal skills that tied into their character and had some cool gameplay integration. Not all of them were hits, but they were miles and miles ahead of Engage's personal skills in my opinion. There were a few others in FE4 and FE5, and then of course in Path of Radiance we got the innate skills, but they were technically personal skills that you could remove. Why would you want to remove Celerity from Tormod, for example? It can't go to anyone else. And then we got to Radiant Dawn, where we had the innate skills. You could count them as personal skills, I guess, but you could also remove them and give them to someone else, but they would cost capacity that way. However, giving them back to the unit they originally belonged to would also cost them capacity suddenly. I didn't like that, so for Daybreak we're making some changes. First of all, every character will get personal skills, and they will stay innate if they can be removed. On top of that, there will also be a couple of innate skills that can be given to other characters, but if you transfer them back to the original holder, Tormod's Celerity for example, they will not cost capacity for Tormod, even if you remove them first. Now, with that out of the way, there are going to be a lot of personal skills. I'm really proud of these, and they will even feature some upgrades, some through support levels, some through story, some through base conversations, some through class changes, and I won't spoil all of them. There will be a couple that I'll keep hidden for now, but some of them I will give some context, kind of like Oki and Janav. We know their personal skills already, so I will expand upon what they will be doing when they get their upgrade. One final thing of note, you may see some weird things in the background at times. Chaos Manifest is currently Micaiah's class, and I believe that Nolan at some point has the class Reaver Boyd. These are all just for testing, and I haven't made all the classes yet, so if you see anything weird, this is all just about the personal skills. Don't worry about anything else on the stat screen. And I guess for context, there are a couple of things that I should mention. The Path of Radiance bans will return. They will instead not grant a buff to growths, but they will instead grant a small stat bonus, and they will be the way that you unlock your class skill. If you have it as your equipment in your inventory, you will have the class skill if the, for example, Myrmidon band is on a Swordmaster or a Myrmidon or a True Blade. They will get Axebreaker in that case, and for the Halberdiers, if they have the Soldier band, they will get access to Swordbreaker. There will also be a couple of items like shields. These are your Three Houses and Shadows of Valentia-esque equipment. You can't carry multiple at the same time, they will deactivate, but these will have extra effects and they will have bonus effects for soldiers and for generals because they wear a shield in their combat model. These are just for context for a couple of personal skills. Now really let's get into it. First off, we have of course Micaiah. She retains Sacrifice and the upgrades will be hidden for now. I did clean up the UIs for a lot of these skills, so in this case we have the curable conditions, Poison, Sleep, Silence, Freeze, which is kind of like Fate's Freeze, Paralysis and Petrify, but Micaiah of course has this as her personal skill. She cares about others, she's able to heal without a staff, and of course this has the gameplay integration. What the upgrades will be, we'll leave that for the future. Next up is Sothe. And I really wanted the personal skill to reflect how protective he is of Micaiah, but due to gameplay integrations, I ended up making it for a support partner, but to offset that a little bit, if you want to support someone else, you can. It is basically guard, but actually worthwhile because it always procs if the conditions are met, but the added benefit is if you then want to re-support Micaiah, it will immediately set the A support instead of starting at C and having to build up gradually to A. In this way, I really think that the personal skill reflects his protectiveness, and it also has cool gameplay integration where he can not just protect Micaiah, but anyone you would want to choose by supporting them. Then we've got Leonardo, who is the calm and collected of the two between him and Edward, so I wanted to reflect that where if he is at nearly full HP, I didn't want to make it at full HP because 1 HP level up then would disable the skill, so 90% it is, but he gets speed +3 on unforged basic or PRF weaponry. These would be your bronze, slim, steel, iron, and silver weapons, and then of course, in his case, the Luke Nasad. Speed +3 is quite basic, but it is very helpful in the early game especially, and it also sets him apart from the other archers because he will be the fastest in the end. Edward, meanwhile, gets, when he's not at full HP, with unforged basic or PRF weaponry, he gains strength +3. He, of course, is the way more reckless of the two. He wants to get in there, so I really wanted a skill that reflected him being in the thick of things, fighting, and he is more strength-based than the other Swordmasters because, as Nolan says in 1-1, he is not yet fully experienced and just way more reckless and not careful enough. So less focus on skill, more focus on strength. For Nolan, I really wanted to tie into his old man-based conversations and his mentorship role. So he is the dad of the group, and if he is in support range after combat, he will grant his support partner 5, 10, or 15 XP based on the support level. It also sets his biorhythm to good, so it's a really easy way to have some agency over his biorhythm. This is something that I'll mention here. The 5, 10, and 15 XP is also applicable with Blossom and Paragon, so the values will change if you have those skills. All in all, I really think this reflects him as a more of a mentor figure, more of a supportive skill, and it can help patch up the trainee units, whichever one you want to choose so, by getting them some easy experience in the form of Nolan's guidance. Next, we have Abbott's Praise for Laura. And Laura is one of the 2 characters that seemed really fitting for staff bonking. This one requires a little bit of context. We have the bandit conversation, of course, everyone loves that one, and she will get steal afterwards. And to steal, you need strength and speed to steal heavier weapons and to outspeed the enemy to be able to steal in the first place. So she can get up to strength plus 10 and speed plus 5, depending on how many combats she survives, and with that, she will be able to steal more, she will be able to bonk more because she's also kind of clumsy. We see that in the Aran Laura sleep staff support. It really seemed fitting for her to have something to do with her weird character where she is clumsy and she goes all in on the bandit thing, and having something that reflects that. Aran, on the other hand, is more built towards the perception of the players, where they always think with his high defense growth and his low speed that he is kind of an armor knight in a soldier class line. So I couldn't make Wary Fighter work, but Steadfast, he cannot be lunged by enemies that have lunge or like wind magic or anything that could push units around. The knights and large beasts like lion, tiger, and transformed dragons have this innately, but he also has it just even though he's a soldier. It is more a skill that leans into the public perception of Aran instead of being tied to his rather bare-bones personality. I do think this gives him a really cool role in Dawn Brigade as your Doga will choke this point character, and not being able to be moved around seemed rather fitting for that. There is one exception, but we'll get to that later. For Ilyana, I couldn't not go to her hunger, because that's the core part of her character, pretty much the only part, in my opinion. I would have liked to have her be a little bit more than just hungry all the time, but I am going to lean into it because it is the core identity of Ilyana. At the start of turn, if she has no healing items, such as the herb, vulnerary concoction, or elixir, she takes 5 damage. Because she is frail, she will get into low HP thresholds really easily. You can make use of Wrath and Resolve, that's the idea. So, for gameplay, basically crit focused low HP build, but if you want to heal her really easily, just pop one of those items, the herb, etc. in her inventory, and she will consume the entire thing, but then give you leftovers. So if you give her a concoction, she will eat the entire concoction, heal for 40 HP, but then she leaves behind a vulnerary in her inventory. So you don't lose out on the full concoction, you still get some leftovers out of it. Meg, of course, is so caring. I had to do something that she actually helps her allies, also a very supportive character and a supportive personal skill. And of course, this will fit in really well with Zihark if you choose to pair them together. If unit defeats an enemy when initiating combat and is in range of support partner, it will count not her, but her partner's highest special cooldowns by 1. It seems like a really fitting thing because she just wants to help everyone. She is such a lovely character. Volug's personal skill is mainly based on his conversation where he goes back to the desert and digs up a blue gem, and he may come across items and pick them up on the battlefield. These are not tied to the hidden treasure, these are unique to him. He will be the only one able to pick them up, and he also gets a little bit of XP for it as well. Hopefully you get lucky. It seems really fitting for him just based on the conversations that he had. And of course, it also helps to have a few personal skills that aren't really combat focused, but more for interesting gameplay in other ways. And this one really accomplishes that, in my opinion. One of the first personal skills where we actually have to do a little bit of context about going towards the upgrades, because in this case, Jill gets defense and resistance +2 when adjacent to Lagoos, and she gains strength and magic +2 when adjacent to Dayan allies. However, the upgrade changes depending on which route she takes. If she stays with the Dawn Brigade, she will empower her Dayan allies more, but if she goes to the Grail Mercenaries, she will actually buff their defenses more. This is one of the personal skills where you really have a choice in how you want to upgrade it and which way you want it to go. There will be multiple personal skills for Jill, depending on the path she chooses. The same is true for Zihark. At the start of turn, count down all unit specials by 1 if support partner is a Laguz and support level is equal to B or higher. This, of course, takes a little bit of work. Volug will be your primary unit, but Muarim, Vika, Nailah, or Rafiel could also work. And I couldn't just not tie Laguz to Zihark because it's such a core part of his character. It also really helps that he is now more about the skill usage compared to Edward, where Edward is more about raw damage. Zihark gets his damage output mainly from triggering Adept multiple times and being able to really chain multiple skills together, and this helps with that. For Zihark, of course, this is, just like Jill, a skill that will change depending on if you stay with the Dawn Brigade or if you go towards the Grill Mercenaries. I won't spoil what these modifications to the personal skill will be, but just that there will be changes depending on the route you take. Tauroneo, of course, is one of the great pillars of Dayan. He is a figurehead that people rally behind. He was one of the great riders. The song was written about them. General Lanvega from the song, Bryce, Tauroneo, Gawain, and Lanvega. 4 riders of Dayan, 1 country, 1 king. While they bear our banner, a free Dayan shall sing. I really wanted his personal skill to reflect that, so he inspires not just your ally units, the yellow units, the Dayan militia, by giving them a small buff. He also sets your playable units that are from Dayan to good or best by rhythm, depending on their curve. I think this really ties in well with his role in the Dayan's legend, basically, and it is a nice way to also have some agency over by rhythm once again. Fiona's personal skill is entirely based around her as this character that really wants to help the citizens. She, of course, saves the hostages, she saves the little boy, and I wanted to reflect that. At the end of turn, if she is next to unshifted Laguz or infantry allies below 50% HP, she will try to rescue them at the end of player phase. Because she has Savior, she won't lose any stats, and this means that she can actually have more action economy, because she can attack or use an item and then reposition next to the ally that you want to save, and she will pick them up. It's 2 actions in 1, and I think that's a really powerful and interesting way to work with the character. I think we'll be able to do some really cool positional stuff with Shelter this way. For Tormod, I couldn't not go to the helping Laguz angle. He will grant adjacent untransformed Laguz 10 gauge when he initiates combat. It's basically, just like with agency over Birhythm, it's a personal skill that gives you agency over Laguz gauge, because that's one of the more boring parts of the Laguz as a class. Their gauge management was really boring. You just transformed and then you chucked Olivigrass, or you used the Laguz stone if you were really low on gauge. And with this, hopefully through some clever positioning, you will be able to keep your Laguz topped up, and that makes for more interesting gameplay choices in my opinion. So I think it really hits well on the narrative and the gameplay aspect. Muarim won't have a personal skill until he gets drugged by Izuka. This personal skill is mainly there just to create some unit identity compared to the other 2 tigers, where Muarim will be the strong and fast one, and Mordecai will of course retain his bulky and slow character identity with the high defense stat. And in this case, Muarim will lose a lot of HP, defense, and resistance, but he will have increased strength and speed, which will, if you keep him alive, also allow him to thrive in Part 4 when he comes back, or maybe sooner. The Galder of Rebirth that Rafiel sings, of course, cures him, but having some lingering effects, in my opinion, was an acceptable slight headcanon to give him a really cool and interesting personal skill to make him very distinct from the other tigers and lions. Vika took a while. The idea that I had in the end, of course, she was a slave, and I really wanted her to stay transformed, because you just can't bring her down to the ground, you can't keep her chained up. And having that tied to how far you travel during the map is also something that's like the movement. A slave is usually tied to one location. So both instances, being able to stay transformed and being able to travel all around the map to do so, seemed really fitting for her as someone who is now fighting for liberation and who wants to be free herself. After combat, unit gains Laguz gauge equal to the distance traveled from the original starting location. The Herons have some unique roles as well, where Rafiel is all about the healing Heron. At the start of turn, he will heal himself and support partner for 5, 10, or 15 HP based on support level, and this is doubled for bonded units and doubled if Rafiel is at full HP. Nailah, if Rafiel is at full HP, would actually be able to get 60 HP back if they're at an A support. The healing aspect really fits with Rafiel in my opinion, because he himself of course has his broken wings. He got sick when he was with Hetzel, so him trying to care for others when he was himself very sickly and ill at a certain point in his life seems really fitting to me, that he wants others to stay healthy and care for them. Nailah, of course, has a personal skill already. I am not going to touch Glare that much. It is just slightly buffed where it's a 10 plus skill divided by 2% chance to petrify a regular enemy unit, and it will always work when she is at best biorhythm. Once again, I want to make biorhythm a little bit more of a thing, a tool that you had agency over, and this is going to help with that. Getting her to best biorhythm and then being able to glare an opponent seems like something that is fun to do. You could basically glare the entire map if you wanted to. It'll take a while. It is not the most useful personal skill, but I do think it is one of the most fun ones. For the Black Knight, that was what that bit of context regarding the bans was for at the start. His entire movement plus his attack range, which is 2 due to Elondite, will be the AoE in which he disables all the equipment such as the Paladin band, the Soldier band, the Sage band, Priest band, etc, etc. And he will disable the class skills that are tied to those pieces of equipment for the enemy. This means that he's not only a very strong unit, he will also be very useful in area control for disabling certain skills that the enemy might have. You might be wondering why Elincia has 2 personal skills and why this one seems to be absolutely dogshit. The first one is just there for part 2 when she is insecure. If unit does not defeat an enemy, the enemy will restore 5 HP and the unit loses 5 XP after combat. She will have plenty of time to grow in later chapters, and this is basically just a narrative flavor thing, where when she gets to Resolute Ruler at the end of part 2 after her choice, she will actually get a way better personal skill. And that one also needs some context. Defeating an enemy disables Mercy on enemy phase, and granting Mercy on enemy phase grants the unit 15 XP and heals Crimean allies for 5 HP. Mercy does not activate on player phase, it will only activate on enemy phase. It's just a skill that she has, and on enemy phase she will not kill an enemy. Except if you defeat an enemy on player phase, it will be disabled on enemy phase in that case. However, if you choose to do anything else on player phase, like rescuing, taking, dropping, giving, or healing with a staff, or using a healing item on yourself, you will keep the Mercy effect on enemy phase, but if you then are in combat with an enemy or multiple, you might proc Mercy, but you will gain extra experience on Elincia, and it will heal all Crimean allies globally for 5 HP. So she can either go for a combat enemy phase if she kills on player phase, or she can go for a supportive role on enemy phase by getting in range of a couple of enemies and then globally healing all the Crimean allies that are deployed. It's mostly to make Mercy more of a choice and have 2 different roles that Elincia can fulfill depending on what you want. Marcia is pretty much always angry at Makalov, and Compensate really ties into that. It does require Makalov to be deployed and be used, so this personal skill probably is going to lose its lock, because if people really hate Makalov, then I don't want this skill to just be a dead slot, so in that case people would be able to get another skill slot by removing this, but they can always give it back. Basically, Makalov needs to fail, and that will make Marcia better. She will be the crit-focused Pegasus Knight compared to Tanith and Sigrun, and in this case, if Makalov fails to damage a foe when he initiates, she will gain 25 critical hits. It is mostly narrative tie-in, but I do think that it's also really cool that she gets better if he has to fail. And, of course, if you don't want to use Makalov, I'll probably make it so that you can just remove this skill and give her an extra other skill that you can just grab from somewhere. As I said with Rafiel, he is the healing-focused one. Leanne is the biorhythm-focused Heron, mainly because we see this with the CG where Elincia cries into her lap, and she has a very basic personal skill at the start of turn. If unit and support partner are in support range, set units biorhythm to best. Also more agency for biorhythm so that you can actually play around with it, and it's very basic, but it is very nice because it's basically plus 20 hit. I couldn't not go into the doting aspect of Nealuchi, him always caring for his nestling and always trying to be there and raise and help along all the other Lagoos, so he will generate an Olivi Satchel each turn to a maximum of 3. If an unshifted Lagoos is adjacent at the start of turn, you will consume 1 Satchel and grant the Lagoos 10 gauge. This is actually for any adjacent Lagoos, so if you have 4 of them adjacent, you will consume 1 Satchel and all of them will gain 10 gauge. It's another way to be able to modify and work around your Lagoos gauge, besides just chucking Olivi Grass. For Haar, I couldn't not reference him wanting to sleep all the time, so what better way than to make him the premier unit to bait any enemy that has a sleep spell active. he will gain defense and resistance +4 and nullify, just to make him the best unit for baiting out any sleep enemies, and then also being able to tank the following enemy phase. Brom is so wholesome, he's just the best dad ever, and I really wanted to have his personal skill reflect that he is just a friend to all. He will try and take care of everyone. So he will give 5 critical hit and dodge to anyone who is adjacent to him. Doesn't matter who, he's such a lovable character, and I really wanted that to reflect in his personal skill. For Nephenee, I wanted to tie the shield equipment into her personal skill. Of course, we see the scene in Path of Radiance where she and Brom were captured as they were just unexperienced militia, but now that she has had an entire war that she has gone through, as long as she has that shield in her equipment, she will gain an additional 15 critical hit when she's below 30% HP. She plays way different from Aran. It also creates class identity where she is way more about critical hits and Aran is way more about tanking. And we'll get to Danved soon. For Heather, there was really only one thing that I could really go into, and that was the fact that she seems to really like women. So when adjacent to a female unit at the start of turn, she will get set to best biorhythm. It'll make her happy. It's a really easy tie-in, but once again, nice agency over biorhythm, and it seemed fitting enough. For Lucia, I really wanted to tie her personal skill to the fact that she is part of the information network, so disarming the enemy seems like taking preventive measures, and in this case, as long as she is adjacent to an ally, so she's guarding someone, she will reduce the cooldown of disarm by 2 at the start of enemy phase. For gameplay, this makes it interesting where you want to place her in certain locations where she is adjacent, and then she might be able to bait a very powerful attack with an enemy with a powerful weapon and disarm them if you also give her advantage, for example. Lethe was very easy to make a personal skill for. She is one of the most assertive and aggressive of the Legus that you meet, and in this case it's basically more action economy because as long as she defeats an enemy, she basically gains some free Olivia grass during that turn as well. And that will keep her topped up, she will be able to keep fighting, and you can basically chain this as long as she's transformed to keep her transformed, and I think that is a creative and interesting way to try and keep a Legus going. On the other hand, Mordecai is of course a big softie. He is still going to retain his role of the bulky tiger, who is a lot slower, but he is such a kind-hearted soul that I want to have a very supportive skill. So at the start of enemy phase, if unit is in support range, it will grant the support partner defense and resistance +3. This is done through an item that you won't see on enemy phase because you can't check inventory. However, if your support partner does actually have a full inventory, he will actually still ask you if you want to take his gift and then you can put it in the inventory or send it to convoy. But no, you will not be able to stack these in the convoy, they will be removed. So it's in your best interest to just put them in the inventory for the defense and resistance bonus. We're at the Crimean Royal Knights, and Geoffrey as their leader. Of course, the chapter is called Geoffrey's Charge. I had to give him something that reflected that, and in this case he suffers no terrain penalties, and he also is able to move 1 tile further just because of his class. So he will be the one that's going to be able to run the furthest on any given turn. And this will help him because in 3.9 and in 4.5 as well, there are multiple chapters where he is deployed that have really difficult terrain for paladins otherwise, and he will have no such issues. Kieran's personal skill is mainly taken from the Oscar and Kieran conversation. He is wild and he is reckless, and he will lose HP after every time he initiates combat. This is once again to also create a bit of unit identity. It will synergize really well with a couple of the low HP skills that you can use like Vantage, Resolve, Wrath, etc, etc. And yeah, it makes him interesting in a way because he behaves very different compared to all the other paladins. And that's something that I really wanted to try and get across with these personal skills, that they all make the unit function slightly differently. Then we've got Makalov, and this one is technically not entirely character and narratively true, because it would jive a little bit too much with the gameplay. Makalov, similarly to Volug, is able to get not items, but gold, by just finding it randomly on the ground. However, it's Makalov, so he can actually also lose gold, and that's going to piss off Marcia even more. However, because you don't want a personal skill to be a net negative for the entire game, I did make it so that he will gain more money on average than he loses, and if he finds money, it will also be of a higher amount than when he loses money, so you should end up on a net positive most of the time. But he can also just be on a loss streak, and that would be very Makalov-esque. For Astrid's personal skill, I really had a clear vision where I wanted the narrative aspect to come into play, and that was her independence, her striking out on her own. Unlike her sisters who were locked in their arranged marriages, she actually goes out and she lives for herself. The condition where no units can be adjacent is not necessarily because she wants to be alone. It is more that she wants to be able to stand on her own 2 feet, to be independent. It is not based on wanting solitude, but wanting independence. It's a big distinction compared to, for example, Shinon, who just wants to be left alone. I think this is a really cool skill to showcase her independence, and it gives her a really cool bonus compared to the other bow users because she will have bonus range really easily. We come to the exception for Aran. I had to play into this for Danved. He fights like 10 men, and I didn't just want to give him 10 times the normal amount of strength because that would be kind of broken. So instead, he's just very strong. He will be able to shove and smite most allies and opponents. He can even shove and smite, I believe, with a statue frag transformed lions. Like, he can do a lot, and he will get more displacement options as he grows into the game. A couple of his skills will really reflect that and tie into that part of his character. For Calill, I had to go for the Arcane Supremacy because she classifies herself in Path of Radiance as a first-rate sage. So in this case, when she defeats a foe with weapon triangle advantage, she gains range +1 on non-siege fire tomes until the end of the following turn. This is mainly because fire tomes are basically the axe equivalent of the magic system, where fire is mostly one range, and the normal fire mages are basically very beefy, higher defense than normal, and a lot slower. And that of course doesn't really fit Calill as a character profile. So instead, as long as she defeats an enemy, she actually gains the range +1, and she doesn't have to fight with her main weapon type in melee range. So in this case, I think it's a really cool way to showcase her supremacy over the arcane arts and show that she is superior towards the other mages that she fights, and it also allows her to actually get out of the melee playstyle that fire magic is normally supposed to entail. Ike's Determination seemed like a fitting name for the skill, and one of the things that really resonated with Ike's character is the fact that he was trained by Grail, and then later he got a bit of study under Stefan as well to be able to learn Ether. Well, I wanted to be able to give Ike his unique way of fighting, and I've done so with a sort of pseudo-desperation. You might recognize the icon as well. When Ike is at or below 50% HP and initiates combat, Unforged basic weaponry has the Brave trait. However, if conditions are met, speed is set to 0. This basically means that Ike can either use a different kind of weapon, and he will just attack normally, and then the enemy attacks and he will attack again if he doubles. However, he can also choose to just whack twice, but you better kill the enemy in that case, because otherwise you are guaranteed getting doubled as well. It's a playstyle difference, and you can choose which way you want to use Ike in this case. I think that makes for a creative unit identity, and I think it also really ties in nicely with his specific way of being taught how to fight. Is this also making this the canonical way that Grail fought? Maybe, I guess, but Ike has developed this skill over the course of the Mad King's War. He has been tutored by Stefan and by Grail. I think it's nice to give him a specific way of being able to fight. Next, we get to Titania, which is actually one of the weakest personal skills in my opinion so far. However, currently we have Scarlet Vanguard. If a unit defeats an enemy before any allies have moved, unit lowers enemy morale, dealing 3 damage to all foes. This is global. It's literally all foes. I might bump it down to 2 damage, that will be a balancing thing. But the idea was that with Titania still being the deputy commander, still being someone who everyone else of the Girl Mercenaries looks up to, she often takes charge and shows by example. So by being the first one to act, you get a nice damage buff that might have some cool chip damage to set up kills elsewhere. And that will help the other Girl Mercenaries. So in the end, not the best fit, but I also still think that it could fit her character decently well. It's just a skill that I'm not 100% on board on. I don't know if I want to change it or not. Mist's personal skill has a couple of layers. First of all, it might not seem to make a lot of sense that the unit that has a lot of order inside of her, being able to hold Lyran's medallion, has such a fluctuating affinity. But the idea behind it is that the ambient affinity of the world will shift depending on where you are, the map affinities in this case, and her natural state of being will reflect the area around her. So she will attune to that affinity and will match it. Now, it's also a small nod to the other project, Radiant Dawn Exalted, which is based around the 8 affinities. And for gameplay, it has really cool interaction because depending on the character you want to support, you get different bonuses each map. And I think that's really cool and a very unique thing for a unit with a unique class. For Soren, I couldn't go for anything other than being something very selfish as long as it's related to Ike. So in this case, if unit defeats a foe whilst adjacent to Ike, count down unit specials by 2. And in this case, he also has Adept just like Zihark, so being able to sling multiple skills and chain them together seemed really fitting. The Ike condition seemed fitting, and it is something that also really helps him in the gameplay department because he might not be the fastest mage, but he still will be able to proc Adept faster this way. One of the few supporting skills for the Grail Mercenaries, the Dawn Brigade is way more supportively oriented in the personal skill department, whereas the Grail Mercenaries are a bit more offensively oriented, and Oscar is one of the few exceptions. If either Rolf or Boyd or both are adjacent but no one else, grants adjacent allies defense and resistance +5 during enemy phase. He is of course the eldest brother, he wants to protect his 2 younger siblings, and I think this skill really reflects how he is the one that has always taken care of them. And here we have one of those more offensively oriented personal skills, in this case Hubris. This is of course based on the conversation between Rolf and Boyd where which is stronger, strength or skill, and in this case if he defeats a foe that is at a higher level, it will grant him an additional 20 experience, and it will also raise his strength by 2 but lower his skill by 2. It will stack up to 5 times, meaning that he can get +10 damage but also -20 hit in the end. This also really ties well into the gameplay differences between him and Nolan, because Nolan will have more skill and is able to really easily raise his biorhythm, so he will be able to wield the lower accuracy axes, whereas Boyd doesn't really need the axes with fancy effects because he can just power through with his personal skill, but he does really want a heaven support or use just an axe forge with plus hit forge on top of it. Rolf is one of the trainee units, and I didn't want to go the boring route of just slapping Paragon on all of them just like with Astrid in Path of Radiance. Instead, if Shinon defeats an enemy, unit gains 15 XP, and the effect is doubled if Shinon is the support partner. This also still stacks with Paragon if you choose to give it to him, so you can get up to 60 experience just by Shinon having defeated an enemy. It creates a distinction between master and pupil, and it also helps Rolf more quickly grow out of his trainee level and getting up to speed with the rest of the Grail Mercenaries. He will still be a project unit, but it's not just grind, there will be ways to accelerate his experience gain, and I want to have the trainee units feel rewarding to invest into. Now, when he actually gets to a higher level than Shinon, he will get a new personal skill, but if Shinon surpasses him again, it will go back to Apprentice. What that personal skill is going to be, you'll have to wait and see. Next we have Shinon, the Master Marksman himself, and even though it's called Sure Shot here, I'll probably go back to Deadeye on this one, but just like Astrid, as long as he has no units adjacent, he will gain 15 critical hit rate and he will have perfect hit with unforged basic weaponry and his own bows. This is the Silencer and of course Iron, Steel, Silver, Bronze and the Bowgun as well. It makes him very reliable, he will get extra critical hit rate, he'll just be a very reliable unit, but he might not have the same growth potential that Rolf has. We get to Gatry, the other of the 2 gender-related skills. In this case, this is actually already the upgraded version, where we have seen the conversation between Shinon and Gatry about the tree dressed into a skirt, tell me I'm wrong, the famous line. Gatry will have low skill, but he will gain 20% hit when adjacent to female units, not necessarily just allies, and it will also set his biorhythm to best when he is adjacent to trees, which is another 20% hit rate. So in this case, he can get up to hit rate plus 40, which will really help him, and you will really want to think about positioning with Gatry to maximize his hit rate as much as you can. I couldn't not go for a white-clad rival with Mia, because it's such an integral part of her character. In this case, she gains fortune when adjacent to white-clad units. This is a reference to her fortune being red, and when in support range and partner is white-clad, it will set her biorhythm to best. Riz is the healiest healer to have ever healed. At the end of player phase, unit heals the lowest health adjacent ally for 10 HP, gaining 10 experience himself. It plays into him being the healer for the Grail Mercenaries. He is rather sickly, so I didn't really want to have something very high impacts for him. That didn't seem fitting. Instead, he's just going to be able to grant some additional healing and also get experience for himself that way. Ranulf has 9 lives. If a unit fights an enemy that is 5 levels higher than unit, or unit level times 1.5 for Bajork foes, unit basically has Miracle. And this is a tie-in to him having fought the Black Knight in Path of Radiance in Chapter 11, him having had to fight Skrymir, and then having to fight Zelgius, being able to fight the Black Knight, and in 3 Endgame being able to fight Nailah or Kurvnaga, even though Kurvnaga is kind of a wimp. Like, in lore, he's still fearsome. I really wanted to toy with the idea of cats have 9 lives, and the best representative for that is definitely Ranulf, having always the short end of the stick, fighting all the big, bad, scary enemies. We get to the other set of character-specific personal skills. Just like with Marcia needing Makalov on the battlefield, in this case Lyre does need Ranulf and Kisha on the battlefield. These will probably also be unlocked in Daybreak, so that you can remove them if you don't want to use all 3 of them. Unit has an improved biorhythm. It is not there yet, but imagine this curve, but just shift it to the top slightly. Imagine that her biorhythm is just shifted, let's say, half a centimeter upwards. In this case, she will have higher highs, and they will stay there for longer, and her troughs with the worst biorhythm will be shorter. Other than that, if unit is closer to Ranulf than Kisha at the start of turn, she will gain 20 gauge. So in this case, it is mainly because her and Kisha are of course both a bit smitten with Ranulf, and I wanted to reflect that in the personal skill by getting her 20 gauge just by being closer to him. This could be literally 8 versus 9 tiles away, she will still get the benefit. And then of course we have Diligent Soldier. This is, as you can probably guess, if unit is closer to Ranulf than Lyre at the start of turn, unit gains 20 experience. The experience is chosen here mainly because Kisha is the most average tiger, his stats will be the weakest compared to Muarim and Mordecai, but he has increased weapon experience gain, so his weapon ranks will level up faster, and to also mitigate the fact that his stats might be a bit on the more average side, he will be able to accelerate his experience gain and gain more stats that way. It's a different way to play the tiger compared to the other 2, and I hope they will all feel distinct from one another. The last of the herons. Rayson, of course, is raised basically by Tabarn, or at the very least he has been around Tabarn so much that he is way more feisty than all the other herons. So it's a very small chance that you will be able to use this multiple times, but if unit defeats an enemy, all unshifted Lagoos are granted additional gauge. I believe it's like 15 at the moment. It's stronger than Tormod or Nealuchi's skill, but it's also hinging on the requirements that Rayson kills an enemy, which probably won't happen that often. Then we get Janaf. I decided to buff Insight slightly, it's still the 20% hit rate and also Fog of War Vision raised by 5, but he also gets 20% critical hit because Ulki's Vigilance was Avoid and Dodge, and that seemed like something that had to be remedied by buffing Janaf's Insight slightly. However, the upgrades for these 2, in my opinion, are really cool because they don't tie into combat at all, but I still think that they are very interesting and fit their characters so well. In Janaf's case, if you decide to deploy him and you have the upgraded personal skill, you will actually get more hidden treasure on the map, because his eyesight is good enough that he can actually see the stuff that's buried slightly more than the other hidden treasure. So I hope you'll be able to play with that, and I hope you'll enjoy. For Ulki, however, when he gets the upgrade, he will actually be able to hear when the reinforcements are coming. So every single time that there will be reinforcements coming, player phase before that, he will say, hey, I hear the flapping of wings coming from the northwest, or I hear the drumming of hooves coming from the southeast. He will be able to give you a bit more information on what is coming. He won't be able to tell you everything, but it seemed very cool to have a personal skill that allows you to plan ahead and actually get that strategy part that he is so famed for the fact that Tabarn is relying on him to be his ears. I think it's a really cool way to integrate that into the gameplay without actually doing anything with combat itself. Tanith, of course, couldn't not get reinforced. It's finally back from Path of Radiance, and I couldn't be happier. It's slightly different, but on turn 2 and turn 5, you will get the option to summon reinforcements. If you summon them on turn 2, they will appear on turn 3, and then they won't appear on turn 5. It's just a one-time summon, but you can delay it by a couple of turns if you want to do so. And then, of course, we get to the Holy Guard for Sigrun. Sigrun is basically a miracle for Sanaki. If Sanaki were to reach 0 HP, but is within 3 tiles, unit flies to and rescues the Apostle, setting the Apostle's HP to 1. This also only works if Sigrun is able to rescue. If she already is carrying someone, this won't work. but you might be able to do some really cool plays where you bait out a very specific attack with Sanaki, and because she has a guaranteed miracle, you can really play around with how you want to work with that, baiting a couple of enemies and then having Sigrun move back, being able to do some... I think people will be able to do some really cool stuff with this, and I think it's really in character that she is basically a bodyguard, just like Sothe is for Micaiah, but in a different way. And then we get to Nailah, who had Vortex and Path of Radiance, and I wanted to keep that in. But I couldn't give him just magic damage by being able to use tomes. Instead, he will swap between a physical and a magic-based Laguz class, and his weapon type will be physical or wind magic damage, depending on which form he is in. This will give him unique damage properties because he's able to choose his battles accordingly, and it also gives him a couple of wind magic disruptions, being able to push units around when he is in his wind magic form. So I hope you really enjoy playing around with one of the few Laguz that is able to do magic damage and also influence the battlefield in other ways, like displacing enemies. Sanaki is one of the personal skills that I couldn't really fit something narratively and character driven, but for gameplay I think it really hits a cool note, where let's say you're in the desert and you have Riss, Laura and Micaiah all use a purge weapon. These then go on cooldown. You can't use them turn after turn after turn. However, if, in this case, Sanaki then uses, let's say, Nosferatu or Elite, it will actually reset the cooldown of all those purge tomes that were used, and the next turn you will be able to use them again. Sanaki, in this case, is able to facilitate a siege tome playstyle, and I think that's a unique thing to play around with, and I hope that this will give players an interesting way to tackle maps. Skrymir, being the hothead that he is, when he's brought below 50% HP by an enemy, he will instantly transform. This will also immediately get him to resolve range if he has the skill, and there will be a couple of other 50% thresholds for skills as well. In this case, you only need to walk him forward, you can chug a pure water for example, and then if he gets attacked by an enemy, gets below 50%, he transforms, and he'll be immediately ready for combat, having all of the skills that are for low HP builds ready to go. Tabarn is the Lord of the Skies. We saw this in the vanilla Radiant Dawn game where he had 10 movement compared to the maximum of 9 for other flying classes, and at the end of the game he of course becomes the king of the new nation of all the bird Laguz that are joined together. So in this case, defeating a flying foe resets the cooldown of Impede, which will halve enemy speed after combat, and if unit was unshifted, unit will instantly transform. So yes, you can Falcon Punch your way into transforming. Just like with Elincia, also some nice narrative tie-in with them both being insecure, this base version isn't really that great, but it's also really easy to work around. Just heal him, either with the staff or healing items. It's not difficult to play around. However, the idea was that Peleus is a unit that just refuses to die. There are multiple failsafes to keep him alive. You can heal him normally, but if you don't do that, if he's below 30% HP, he, let's say, has 80 experience, he will gain 40 XP and consume that 80 experience to heal him, and even if that doesn't work, he still has Miracle. Then when it upgrades, of course, it becomes way more beneficial, but the idea is that he grows out of this spirit that keeps him alive, but keeps him from growing as a person, and that if you can resist that, and if you can actually get him to grow as a person, you will get a way better personal skill. It took me a while to settle onto a skill for Stefan, because on the one hand, I was looking at something tied to his lion ancestry, but in the end I decided to settle on him being the one true sword saint, basically the Astra specialist, and he will be able to proc Astra multiple times during the map. That was the idea. It is also a reference to Omasa, the other green-haired swordmaster that you fight in Path of Radiance during the Nailah chapter. There he can have a conversation with Stefan, and Stefan basically says that he is way out of Omasa's league. And in this case, defeating a sword-wielding foe reduces Astra's cooldown by 2, but if you actually defeat an opposing swordmaster, having that fated duel by dawn that Mia's actually always talking about, then he will just reset Astra's cooldown immediately. Here we have Oliver, the Protector of Beauty. Whilst a Heron is not at 100% HP, even if just one feather is ruffled, unit gains 50 crit and strength plus 6. Yes, he will be able to staff bonk. Is it going to be optimal? I don't know, but it is one of the most requested and one of the most fun things you can do in vanilla Radiant Dawn, so I really want a couple of builds to really facilitate that as well. So happy staff bonking, everyone. Bastion's personal skill wasn't actually going to be his personal skill for a while. I was actually thinking of putting this on Soren, but in the end I couldn't give Soren a personal skill that wasn't in some way, shape or form tied to Ike. So instead, the Cunning Bastion gets a Fair Intent, which I also love the pun because he is Count Fair. If a unit is able to equip a skill, they will always equip the innate version of that skill. These versions are slightly stronger. For example, Vantage for an innate version will always be active, but Vantage that costs capacity will only activate when you're below 50% HP. So he will always get the greatest benefit, and you can make some really cool skill builds work with that. He is a late joining character, but this will give him a unique niche because he will be able to do a couple of builds that no one else will be able to do. Fireman's Fee might be one of my absolute favorite skills because it ties so well with the Volk's character. It is goddamn expensive, but you can create some absolutely ludicrous builds with this. One that I thought was Special Spiral and Quicken Pulse, and then having Fireman's Fee drop down Lethality's cooldown to being only requiring 2 kills, and then just having Vantage as well. You Lethality, you Special Spiral, due to Fireman's Fee it is a 2 kill cooldown, so it goes down from 2 to 0 due to Special Spiral, and because you have Vantage, you just keep Lethalitying all the time. It takes a bit to come online, it costs over 50k gold, but goddamn is it fun to play with. Just like Muarim, a slight bit of headcanon that in this case Renning still has a little bit of Bertram left in him, or at least not Bertram as a character, but more the way of fighting just remains, and he gets a pseudo life and death whenever he has a rune sword in his inventory. Renning will all be about chaining soul and keeping himself topped up with healing. He will have low defenses but high strength and speed, and you can choose to invest into that even more just by giving him a rune sword. Nice reference to Path of Radiance. Koenigus pretty much doesn't need a personal skill, so I made it a very strict one to trigger. It also requires the Galleon Legus to not be transformed at that point, but if you give him Quicken Pulse, you can just have him run in, Colossus someone, and then immediately all your Galleon units will be transformed. It's a nice way to be able to start the map, having not to invest anything into all your other Legus. Just being able to run into the map with a pride of cats, lions, and tigers seems like a fun way to play the game, and that is facilitated just with this personal skill alone. Gifka, the other lion, also doesn't really need a personal skill because they're both really powerful and crutch endgame units. So I gave him a personal skill that doesn't really do anything on the map, but it does bring something to the map. In this case, being the King's Shadow, you don't need to bring him to the tower. You just bring Koenigus, and then he will show up anyway. He is the King's Shadow. He follows where the king goes. So in this case, what Gifka basically gives you is an extra deployment slot if you choose to bring Koenigus to the tower. And I think that is plenty powerful in and of itself. We're now getting into a couple of skills that are not really that strong on the character aspect and mostly just gameplay driven because these characters also join for only a very short while. In this case, Dragon's Wisdom. Defeating a foe when initiating combat will freeze enemies adjacent to target in place until the following player phase. If you fight a spirit that has on each side another spirit adjacent, it will freeze those spirits in place and they won't be able to move. This will be very useful in the final few maps, but of course it's not really tied to his character that much as a couple of the other skills. Dragon's Might, just like with Dragon's Wisdom for Nasir, is mostly gameplay related, but it's also a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, because people just have a skill issue with keeping Gareth alive, it seems. Just pop a Legus Stone on a Wardwood and he will be pretty much fine. You can also place Kurvnaga next to him, you can have him dance and chug a Pure Water, and then he'll just take 0 damage from all the spirits and he will survive 100% of the time Ashra's single target magical attack, but people just can't seem to place him onto a Wardwood anyway, and he dies. So I thought, you know, let's give this physical and strength-based dragon a way to tank more magical hits by getting Paviz's cooldown reset whenever he kills a unit when initiating. Might be a little bit of a pet peeve, but it is good gameplay integration as well, because he does need a little bit more bulk during the final maps, because he of course is going to be a good target. But still, he's really easy to keep alive, guys, even in base Radiant Dawn. Don't sleep on Wardwood tiles. And now we get to maybe my favorite narrative personal skill out of the entire bunch. It's maybe a tie with Fireman's Fee, but we all know the meme-worthy line, "Goldoa will not move." And in this case, Kurvnaga is like, no, I'm gonna move forward as my personal skill. So in this case, the path forward. After initiating combat, unit gains XP equal to distance traveled by unit times 5. Yes, he is a trainee unit. No, he doesn't require Paragon, but you can give it to him for even more busted XP gain. In this case, it ties in narratively by opposing his father and wanting to move forward. It ties in with gameplay by literally moving makes him more experienced, and it also just really helps by being meme-worthy and opposing the meme-worthy line of Goldoa will not move. I fucking love this skill. 10 out of 10, no notes. I'm gonna clap my own shoulder for this one. Sorry guys, I love it. I love it. Enna, on the other hand, isn't as grandiose as a path forward, but still really nice, ties in with her mixed heritage of being partially red, partially white dragon, and in this case she is able to swap between white and red breath just by shifting and reverting. So she can choose which battle she wants to take, and she will always have the upper hand by being able to pick the weapon type that is most effective. Makes for a cool unit identity, and it also fits with the fact that people have wanted this for years. She's a pink dragon, and in this case she gets to play as both red and white. Sade magic. If a unit defeats a spirit when initiating combat, all spirits of that same type will become passive until the following turn. Let's say 12 fire spirits have spawned in, there's only 3 thunder spirits and 2 wind spirits. You kill 1 fire spirit, and that will pacify all the fire spirits during enemy phase. Makes the boss battle easier, but the boss battle will be hard. This is going to be a very useful skill to be able to utilize during the final map. Those are all the personal skills. I really hope you've enjoyed this video and this look into Daybreak. It has taken me a long time to think about all of these skills. I had to take inspiration from a lot of places. I had some help with people brainstorming as well, so big thanks to all the people that helped with that. If you're a patron, or if you are a channel member, or just really active and enthusiastic about Daybreak in the Discord, thank you so much. And I would love to hear from you in the comments down below if you have any ideas for other personal skills for characters that are maybe enemies, or maybe better personal skills for the characters that I have shown. What is your personal favorite skill? I would love to hear from you, and please do let me know. Thank you so much, but for now, Sal out.